"You're coming with me," said the mountain man to the woman beaten by the whole town. Snow falls hard over a Colorado street as a mob drags a bruised woman through the mud, spitting, shouting, calling her cursed. Then, through the storm, a giant figure steps out from the shadows. He doesn't ask. He commands. He throws his coat around her and growls, "You're coming with me." Up in the frozen hills, she learns he's not just any drifter. He's a man hiding from his own sins. And she's not just any outcast. She carries the deed to the very water the greedy miners are killing for. When the fire starts and the noose is tied, mercy becomes their only weapon. But in a town ruled by fear and gold, will faith be strong enough to stop the hanging rope? And when forgiveness costs blood, who will save who? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The heavy snow swirled through Silver Pass's main street, thick flakes catching in Luna Wilkins' dark hair as rough hands dragged her from her small rented room above the general store. Her heart pounded against her ribs as the mob pressed in, their faces twisted with anger and fear in the gray afternoon light. "Witch!" someone shouted from the back of the crowd. "She killed Tommy Wilson's baby with her devil work." Luna clutched her worn leather Bible to her chest, its familiar touch offering little comfort as another set of hands shoved her forward. She stumbled, her skirts heavy with mud and melting snow. "Please," she begged, her voice trembling but clear. "I did everything I could to save both mother and child. The Lord knows my heart." "Shut your mouth!" A burly miner stepped forward, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey. "We don't need your kind here, bringing death to honest folks' doors." Sheriff Dawson stood at the edge of the mob, swaying slightly as he watched. His badge gleamed dully in the weak winter light, but he made no move to restore order. Instead, he took another long pull from the bottle in his hand. "I've delivered dozens of babies safely," Luna protested, trying to keep her voice steady even as tears threatened. "Sometimes the Lord calls his little ones home early, despite our best efforts. A hand struck her across the face, sending her reeling. Her Bible fell into the mud as someone spat at her feet. Luna felt her clothes tearing as the crowd pushed and pulled at her, their accusations growing louder with each passing moment. "Burn the witch! Send her back to hell where she belongs! Justice for the Wilson baby!" At the edge of town, where the rutted street gave way to wilderness, Mateo Brandt's head snapped up at the sound of the commotion. He'd come into Silver Pass reluctantly, bringing his furs to trade at the agency store, preferring as always to avoid people when he could. But now the shouts drew him forward, his worn boots crunching through the fresh snow. As he drew closer, his keen eyes took in the scene. The mob's fury, the useless sheriff, and at the center of it all, a woman he recognized as the town's midwife. He'd seen her before, moving quietly through town on her errands of mercy. She'd always struck him as gentle, capable, nothing like the monster they were making her out to be. Luna fell hard as a miner's boot caught her side, driving the breath from her lungs. The mob's roar grew louder, and through tear-blurred eyes, she saw several men reaching for her with clear intent to do worse. Something in Mateo snapped. He pushed through the crowd, his rifle slung across his broad shoulders, his eyes fierce beneath the brim of his snow-dusted hat. "That's enough," he growled, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. A few people turned to look, but most ignored him, caught up in their frenzy. Luna curled into herself, trying to protect her vital organs as another kick came her way. The crack of Mateo's rifle shot split the winter air like thunder. Snow fell from the nearby roofs as the echo rolled down the street. Now he had their attention. "I said that's enough." His voice was quieter now, but somehow more dangerous. He kept his rifle pointed skyward, but his meaning was clear. Sheriff Dawson finally stirred himself. "Now see here, Brant. This ain't your concern. The lady's got to answer for—" "The lady," Mateo cut in, "hasn't done anything except try to help your people, and you're too drunk to see straight, much less dispense justice." He moved forward, keeping his movements deliberate and calm, like approaching a spooked horse. The crowd parted before him, perhaps sensing the coiled violence in his stance. Luna lay shivering in the mud, her clothes torn, her face already showing signs of bruising. Mateo's jaw tightened as he took in her condition. Without taking his eyes off the crowd, he shrugged out of his heavy wool coat and knelt beside her. "You're coming with me," he said softly, wrapping the coat around her trembling frame. It engulfed her completely, still warm from his body heat. "But my things—" Luna started weakly. "We'll come back for them when these folks remember their Christian charity." The last words were aimed at the crowd, sharp with condemnation. He lifted her carefully, cradling her against his chest as if she weighed nothing at all. Luna couldn't help but notice how gentle his touch was, despite the strength evident in his arms. She clutched at his buckskin shirt, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her palm. The sheriff took a stumbling step forward. "Brant, you can't just—" "I can and I am." Mateo's voice was flat. "Unless you want to try stopping me." The challenge hung in the snow-filled air. Nobody moved. Even drunk, Sheriff Dawson had enough sense to recognize the look in Mateo's eyes. The trapper might live alone in the hills, but stories about his skill with that rifle had circulated for years. No one wanted to test whether they were true. Luna retrieved her muddy Bible with trembling fingers as Mateo adjusted his hold on her. The familiar book felt like a lifeline in her hands, a reminder that God hadn't abandoned her even in this dark moment. Snow continued to fall as Mateo carried Luna through the parting crowd. She could feel him trembling slightly, though whether from effort or anger, she couldn't tell. The mob watched in sullen silence as they passed, their bloodlust cooling in the winter air. "Thank you," Luna whispered against his chest, her words barely audible above the crunch of his boots in the snow. Mateo didn't respond immediately, but his arms tightened protectively around her. After a few more steps, he said quietly, "No decent man could stand by and watch that." Then, even softer, "I've seen too much violence in my life to stomach seeing it done to someone like you." The storm was picking up now, the wind driving the snow harder against them. Luna burrowed deeper into Mateo's coat, grateful for its warmth and the faint scent of pine and wood smoke that clung to the wool. Despite her fear and pain, she felt oddly safe in this stranger's arms. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, as the buildings of Silver Pass began to fade behind them. "I've got a cabin," Mateo replied, his eyes scanning the trail ahead. "It's not much, but it's warm and dry. More importantly, it's far enough from town that those fools won't come looking." He glanced down at her, concern evident in his dark eyes. "Can you hold on until we get there? It's a fair piece through this weather." Luna nodded, though every breath sent pain shooting through her ribs where she'd been kicked. "I'll manage," she said. Then, after a moment's hesitation, "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Mateo was quiet for so long that Luna thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I know enough. I've watched you going about your work in town, seen how you treat everyone with kindness, even those who don't deserve it." He adjusted his grip on her as they started up a slight incline. "Besides, a person doesn't need to know someone to know when something's wrong." The snow swirled around them as they left Silver Pass behind, the angry shouts of the mob replaced by the soft whisper of wind through pine boughs. Luna's body ached, and her heart was heavy with the weight of what had happened. But somewhere beneath it all, a small spark of hope remained. God, it seemed, had sent her a protector when she needed one most. In Mateo's arms, surrounded by his coat and sheltered from the storm, Luna allowed herself to rest. Her last thought before exhaustion claimed her was a prayer of thanks, not just for her rescue, but for the unexpected grace that had appeared in the form of this quiet, fierce man who had chosen to stand between her and harm. The snow continued to fall, covering their tracks as Mateo carried his precious burden deeper into the wilderness, leaving the darkness of human cruelty behind for the peaceful solitude of the forest. His cabin waited ahead, a sanctuary in the storm, and with each step through the deepening snow, he silently renewed his commitment to keeping this woman safe, no matter what tomorrow might bring. The snow fell in thick, heavy curtains as Mateo guided his mule along the treacherous mountain path. Luna lay unconscious before him in the saddle, her slight frame cradled against his chest. He'd draped his warmest blanket around her, but still she shivered, her face bruised and lips tinged an alarming shade of blue. "Easy now," he murmured, more to himself than the mule. The sure-footed animal picked its way carefully through the deepening drifts, steam rising from its flanks despite the bitter cold. Wind howled against the cliff face beside them, sending icy particles stinging against Mateo's exposed skin. He cursed softly as the mule's hoof slipped on a hidden patch of ice. The animal recovered quickly, but the incident sent Mateo's mind spinning back 15 years to another desperate ride through dangerous conditions. Back then, he'd been a young scout for the Union Army, carrying his gravely wounded commanding officer through Confederate territory. Captain Wilkins had died despite Mateo's efforts, bleeding out just miles from their own lines. "Not this time," he growled, tightening his grip on Luna. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was again, risking his life for a stranger. But something in Luna's quiet dignity, the way she'd faced that mob with nothing but her Bible and her faith, had stirred something in him he'd thought long dead. The trail narrowed as they climbed higher, the drop-off to their left becoming steeper with each switchback. Darkness was falling fast, and the temperature dropping with it. Mateo could barely make out the next bend through the swirling snow. He relied on memory and the mule's instincts, knowing one wrong step could send them plummeting into the canyon below. Luna stirred briefly, mumbling something incoherent before slipping back into unconsciousness. Mateo frowned at the heat radiating from her despite the cold, fever setting in, no doubt, from her injuries and exposure. He needed to get her warm and dry, and soon. The wind grew fiercer as they neared the tree line, where his cabin sat nestled against the mountainside. The familiar smell of pine and wood smoke reached him through the storm. He'd banked the fire before heading to town that morning, thank Providence. The mule's ears perked forward at the scent of home and shelter. "Almost there," Mateo encouraged, though whether he was speaking to Luna, the mule, or himself, he couldn't say. The last 100 yards seemed to take an eternity, but finally, the dark bulk of his cabin materialized out of the whirling white. He dismounted carefully, keeping one arm around Luna to prevent her from falling. The mule stood steady, trained to wait, as Mateo gathered the unconscious woman into his arms. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel her shallow breathing through his buckskin shirt. The cabin door creaked open at his push, and blessed warmth enveloped them. It wasn't much. A single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, and supplies stored in neat rows along the walls. But right now it felt like paradise, compared to the howling storm outside. Matteo laid Luna gently on his narrow bed, then hurried to stoke the fire. The embers caught quickly, and soon flames were dancing in the hearth, pushing back the darkness and cold. He needed to tend to the mule, but first he had to get Luna warm. Working efficiently, he wrapped her in every blanket he owned, careful of her visible injuries. The bruises on her face stood out starkly against her pale skin, and anger surged through him again at the thought of the mob's cruelty. He'd seen such violence before, during the war and after, but it never ceased to sicken him. Once Luna was settled, Matteo forced himself to go back out into the storm. The mule needed caring for. No point in saving one life only to lose the animal that had helped them get here. He led it into the lean-to shelter beside the cabin, removed its tack, and gave it a thorough rub-down before making sure it had hay and unfrozen water. Back inside, he hung his snow-covered coat by the fire and set about preparing broth. He always kept dried meat and vegetables on hand, and soon the cabin was filled with the warm, homey smell of cooking. As he worked, he kept one eye on Luna, watching for any sign of worsening condition. The wind rattled the shutters, and somewhere in the darkness, wolves began to howl. Matteo moved his rifle closer to hand, more from habit than any real concern. Wolves rarely bothered his cabin, but tonight he felt especially protective of his unexpected guest. Luna stirred as the smell of broth filled the air. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then widening with fear as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. "Lord have mercy," she whispered, her voice rough and weak. Matteo approached slowly, not wanting to frighten her further. "You're safe," he said quietly. "We're at my cabin, well away from town. The storm's covered our tracks. No one will find you here." She tried to sit up but fell back with a grimace of pain. "The mob," she began. "Is far behind us," Matteo finished firmly. He ladled some broth into a tin cup and brought it to her. "Here, you need to get something warm inside you." Luna's hands shook too badly to hold the cup, so Matteo helped her, supporting her head as she sipped slowly. Color gradually returned to her lips, though the bruises on her face seemed to darken in the firelight. "Thank you," she murmured when she'd finished. Her eyes, though tired, held his steadily. "I don't know why you helped me, but thank you." Matteo set the cup aside and reached for his old army coat, which he'd hung by the fire to warm. He laid it over her as an extra layer of protection against the cold. "Rest now," he said, avoiding her gratitude. "You're running a fever. Sleep if you can." The wolves' howls grew closer, their eerie chorus carried on the wind. Luna shivered despite her layers of blankets, though whether from cold or fear, Matteo couldn't tell. He checked his rifle's load, more to reassure her than from any real concern. "They won't come near," he told her, settling into his chair by the fire. "I'll keep watch." Luna's eyes were already growing heavy, the warmth and relative safety drawing her back toward sleep. "God sent you," she murmured, her words slurring slightly. "Like an angel with a rifle instead of a sword." Matteo's mouth twisted in a wry smile. He was about as far from an angel as a man could get, but he kept that thought to himself. Instead, he watched as she drifted off, her breathing becoming deeper and more regular. The night grew deeper, and the storm raged on. Matteo sat in his chair, rifle across his lap, and listened to the wolves' song mix with the wind's howl. Every so often he'd add another log to the fire or check on Luna's fever. She slept fitfully, occasionally muttering prayers or fragments of scripture. As the hours passed, Matteo found himself studying her face in the firelight. Even bruised and battered, There was a strength there, a quiet dignity that spoke of deep conviction. He'd seen her around town often enough over the past year, tending to the sick and helping new mothers. She'd even tried to greet him once or twice when their paths crossed, though he'd always turned away, not wanting to encourage conversation. Now here she was, sleeping in his bed, trusted to his protection by circumstance and necessity. The irony of it wasn't lost on him. He'd spent years avoiding entanglements with others, protecting himself from the pain of loss by simply not allowing anyone close enough to matter. Yet in the space of a few hours, he'd committed himself to protecting this woman with his life if necessary. Dawn came slowly, heralded by a gradual lightening of the gray beyond the cabin's windows. The storm had blown itself out sometime in the night, leaving behind a pristine blanket of white that transformed the familiar landscape into something almost magical. As Mateo had predicted, their tracks from the previous day were completely obliterated. Anyone trying to follow them would find it impossible. Luna still slept, her fever slightly lower than it had been the night before. The bruises on her face had darkened to purple, but her breathing was strong and steady. She would heal, given time and rest. Mateo stood at the window, watching the sun rise over the snow-covered mountains. He knew this sanctuary couldn't last forever. Eventually, decisions would have to be made about what to do next. The town wouldn't simply forget about Luna, and she couldn't stay hidden in his cabin indefinitely. But for now, she was safe. That would have to be enough. Morning. Light crept through the frost-covered windows of Mateo's cabin, casting delicate patterns across the rough wooden floor. Luna's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, she lay perfectly still, confusion etching across her features as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous night came rushing back, angry faces, cruel hands, the bite of snow, and then warmth and safety. She tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in her ribs. The blankets covering her rustled, and she noticed the worn army coat laid carefully on top. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the smell of coffee filled the small space. "Where?" she began, her voice hoarse. "My cabin," Mateo answered from where he stood by the fire. "About 5 miles up from Silver Pass." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, his movements precise and controlled. "You've been asleep since last night." Luna pulled herself into a sitting position, drawing the blankets close. "The mob can't reach you here." Mateo's voice was firm as he crossed the room and offered her one of the cups. "Storms buried our tracks." She accepted the coffee with trembling hands, grateful for its warmth. "Thank you for helping me, Mr. Brandt, but I need to return to town. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. If I could just explain—" "No." The word came out sharp as a gunshot. Mateo moved to the window, frost crunching under his boots. "Trails cut off. Storm dropped 3 feet of snow, maybe more in the passes. Going back now would be suicide." Luna set her jaw, determination flashing in her eyes despite the bruises marking her face. "Those people think I'm responsible for Margaret Weber's death. Her baby." Her voice caught. "I did everything I could to save them both." Mateo turned from the window, his expression softening slightly. "I believe you, but right now, you're staying put." He gestured to the storm-wrapped mountains visible through the frosted glass. "Nature's made that decision for both of us." The wind moaned through the eaves, emphasizing his point. Luna sipped her coffee, letting its warmth spread through her. The cabin was simple but neat, a testament to its owner's orderly nature. Tools hung on pegs, supplies were stacked with military precision, and everything had its place. As the morning wore on, Luna found herself watching Mateo as he went about his tasks. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man used to solitude, checking his supplies, maintaining his gear. When he struggled with a broken door hinge, she set aside her empty cup. "May I help?" she offered. "I'm stronger than I look." Matteo glanced at her, surprise flickering across his weathered features. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. Together, they worked on the hinge, Luna holding it steady while he made the repairs. To fill the silence, she began to hum softly, old hymns her mother had taught her, their familiar melodies bringing comfort. She noticed Matteo's hands pause briefly in their work, his head tilting slightly as he listened. The tension in his shoulders seemed to ease, just a fraction. As they finished with the hinge, Luna gathered her courage. "Mr. Brandt, why did you help me? Most people in town avoid me, especially since—" Matteo tested the door, making sure it swung true. "Seen enough mob justice in my time." His voice was gruff. "During the war—" He stopped, as if catching himself. "The war?" Luna's heart quickened. "You served?" He nodded slowly. "Union Army, scout mostly, under Captain—" His words cut off as understanding dawned in his eyes. "Under Captain Wilkins." Luna's hand flew to her throat, where her wedding ring hung on a chain. "James," she whispered. "You served with James?" Matteo set his tools aside, his movements deliberate. "Didn't make the connection until just now. You're his widow." "Yes." Luna's voice was barely audible above the wind. He spoke of a scout once, a man who could read terrain like others read books, a man who saved his unit from an ambush in Tennessee. She studied Matteo's face. "That was you, wasn't it?" Matteo's expression tightened. "He saved my life first, pulled me out of a river when my horse was shot, wouldn't leave until he knew I'd make it." He turned away, but not before Luna saw the pain in his eyes. "Good man, your husband. Better than most." "He was," Luna agreed softly. "And he would have done the same for anyone. It was his nature." The wind continued its mournful song outside, but inside the cabin something had shifted. The shared memory of James Wilkins hung between them like a bridge, connecting their separate worlds. As the day progressed into evening, Luna noticed small changes in Matteo's behavior. His movements around her became less guarded, his responses less clipped. When she asked about his supplies, he answered in full sentences, explaining his system for surviving the mountain winters. They shared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, and Luna insisted on helping with the cleanup, despite her injuries. As she dried the tin plates, she found herself humming again. "Amazing Grace," this time. To her surprise, Matteo quietly joined in on the chorus, his deep voice barely audible, but true. The second day dawned clear and cold. Luna's bruises had begun to fade, though her ribs still ached. She watched as Matteo checked his trap lines through his spyglass, making sure the snow hadn't damaged them. "Your husband," he said suddenly, still looking through the glass. "He used to say that mercy was stronger than justice." Luna smiled, remembering. He believed that with all his heart. Thought he was naive at the time? Matteo lowered the spyglass. "Maybe he understood something I didn't." They worked together throughout the day, falling into an unexpected rhythm. Luna helped Matteo sort his dried herbs, sharing her knowledge of their medicinal properties. He listened intently, asking questions about treatments and dosages. As evening approached again, Luna stood at the window, watching the sun paint the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and pink. The beauty of it caught in her throat. "I understand now," she said quietly, "why you chose this place. There's a peace here." Matteo joined her at the window, keeping a respectful distance. "Your husband once told me that God speaks clearest in the wilderness." He paused. "Never understood that either, until after the war. Luna turned to study his profile, seeing past the hardened exterior to something deeper, a soul seeking solitude not out of bitterness, but out of a need for healing. "James would be grateful," she said softly, "knowing you helped his wife." Mateo's jaw tightened. Owe him more than that. The wind had died down, leaving a profound silence broken only by the crack and pop of the fire. In that moment, Luna realized that this wild mountain man, who had lived so long in isolation, had shown her more kindness than all the civilized folk in Silver Pass. "Thank you," she said simply, meaning far more than just the rescue. Mateo nodded once, understanding in his eyes. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching as the last light faded from the peaks. Two souls connected by the memory of a good man and the unexpected shelter they'd found in each other's company. The morning brought a tentative calm to the mountain. Icicles dripped steadily from the eaves, their crystalline music marking winter's slow surrender to spring. Luna stood at the cabin's entrance, breathing in the crisp air. Her bruises had faded to yellow shadows, and her strength was returning day by day. Behind her, Mateo pulled on his boots, preparing to check his trap lines. "Storm's breaking," he noted, his voice gruff but no longer unwelcoming. "Trail might be passable in a few days." Luna turned from the doorway, determination setting her jaw. "Before you go, Mr. Brandt, please let me do something to repay your kindness." She gestured to the pile of worn clothing beside his bunk. "Those need mending, and I'd wager they haven't seen soap in months." Mateo's weather-lined face showed a flicker of embarrassment. "No need to trouble yourself." "It's no trouble," Luna insisted, already gathering the scattered garments. "I've been idle too long as it is." She picked up a shirt with a torn sleeve. "Besides, these won't last another season without proper care." After a moment's hesitation, Mateo nodded. "Much obliged," he mumbled, then headed out to check his traps, leaving Luna to her self-appointed task. She hummed softly as she worked, sorting the clothes into piles. The cabin's sparse furnishings left little room for drying space. Her eyes fell on a wooden trunk pushed against the far wall. "Surely he wouldn't mind if I used the lid for drying," she murmured to herself. The trunk's brass hinges creaked as she opened it. Inside lay the careful organization of a military man, spare ammunition, medical supplies, a few books wrapped in oilcloth. As she cleared space on the lid, something caught her eye. An oilskin packet, yellowed with age, sealed with a familiar set of initials. Luna's hands trembled as she traced the letters. J.W. James Wilkins, her husband's mark. She sank to her knees beside the trunk, heart pounding. The packet was tied with twine, preserved as carefully as a precious relic. With trembling fingers, she worked the knot free. Inside, she found several folded documents, their official seals still intact. As she read, her breath caught in her throat. These were land deeds, legal papers filed with the territorial office, water rights for Silver Creek, the spring that fed the entire valley. And there, in clear black ink, was her name. Luna Wilkins, legal owner and executor. More papers spilled from the packet, letters in James's precise handwriting, describing his plans to secure the water rights before heading east to fetch her. The last letter was dated just weeks before his death. "Oh, James," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "You were trying to build us a future." The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. The mining company's sudden interest in her practice, the whispered accusations, the tragic death of Margaret Weber's baby. It all led back to these papers. They must have discovered James's filing and realized she stood between them and control of the valley's water. Luna didn't hear Mateo return until his shadow fell across the documents spread before her. She looked up, tears streaming down her face, clutching the deeds to her chest. "They knew," she said, her voice breaking. "All this time they knew what James had done." Mateo's expression darkened as he recognized the packet. "Found those 2 years back, after—" He trailed off, jaw tightening. "Kept them safe, thinking someday I'd find a way to get them to you." "Why didn't you tell me?" Luna asked, without accusation. He crouched beside her, his voice low and urgent. "Those papers are worth killing for, ma'am. Mining operation can't run without water rights. That's why they turned the town against you. Easier to drive out a witch than fight legal claims." Luna wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Then we have to make this known. The truth—" "Truth won't stop a bullet," Mateo cut in harshly. "Or a mob." His expression softened slightly at her flinch. Seen too many good people die thinking truth was enough. Luna stood, still holding the papers. Outside, the steady drip of melting snow marked time's passage. "Truth may not be enough," she said quietly, "but it's where we must begin." James believed that. He believed in building something better than force and fear. She met Mateo's concerned gaze. "I won't dishonor that belief by hiding." Mateo ran a hand over his face, the gesture betraying his worry. "Your husband was a good man, believed in justice, but he died before he could see how ugly things got out here. All the more reason to finish what he started." Luna carefully refolded the documents, her movements deliberate and calm, despite the tremor in her hands. "These papers don't just prove my claim. They prove the mining companies willing to destroy anyone who stands in their way, even an innocent woman and her unborn child." The cabin fell silent, except for the rhythmic drip of melting snow. Mateo stood at the window, his posture tense as a drawn bowstring. "You understand what you're suggesting? Going back means facing worse than what you fled." Luna placed the papers back in their oilskin wrapper, securing the twine with steady fingers. "I understand that evil prospers when good people stay silent. James taught me that." She touched the wedding ring hanging from her neck. "I also understand I'm not facing this alone anymore." Mateo turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "Never figured to get caught up in water rights and mining claims. Came to these mountains to leave such things behind." "Yet you saved these papers," Luna observed quietly. "Kept them safe all this time. Why?" He was silent for a long moment, the question hanging between them like smoke. Finally he spoke, his voice rough with memory. "Your husband once told me every man's got to decide what he stands for. Said it's not the uniform that makes a soldier, but what he's willing to fight for." He met her gaze. "Reckon that's still true, even out here?" Luna nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She moved to the fire and added another log, watching the flames catch. "The snow's melting," she said softly. "Spring's coming, whether we're ready or not." "Aye," Mateo agreed, his hand unconsciously touching the rifle leaning by the door. "Question is, what do we do when it gets here?" Luna straightened, squaring her shoulders. "We prepare. We gather evidence, seek allies who'll stand for justice. And we pray, not just for protection, but for the wisdom to use truth as a shield rather than a sword." The fire crackled, casting warm light across the cabin's rough-hewn walls. Outside, the steady drip of melting snow continued its patient rhythm, each drop bringing them closer to the moment when they'd have to leave this temporary sanctuary and face what waited in the valley below. Luna returned to the pile of clothes she'd been sorting, her movements purposeful despite the weight of discovery pressing on her heart. "First, we finish what's before us. These clothes still need mending." She offered Mateo a small smile. "Truth can wait until the work is done." He nodded, something like respect flickering in his eyes. They spent the rest of the afternoon in companionable silence. Luna with her needle and thread, Matteo cleaning his rifle and checking their supplies. Each lost in thought about the journey ahead, yet somehow strengthened by the knowledge that they wouldn't face it alone. The drip of melting snow marked time's passage, each drop a reminder that spring, and with it, reckoning, drew steadily closer. Dawn painted the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold. Inside Matteo's cabin, Luna folded her freshly mended dress and tucked it into a worn leather satchel. Her movements were deliberate, each item carefully chosen. Her Bible, James's letters, the precious water rights documents, and a small pouch of dried herbs for tea. Matteo watched from across the room, his face etched with concern. "You can't go back there," he said, his voice rough with worry. "Those people nearly killed you." Luna secured the satchel's buckle before meeting his gaze. "The circuit judge arrives in 2 days. He needs to see these papers to understand what's really happening in Silver Pass." "Papers won't matter if you're dead." Matteo's hands clenched at his sides. "You didn't see their eyes that night. Wasn't just drink making them cruel." Luna smoothed her skirts, touching the wedding ring that hung from a leather cord around her neck. "I saw their eyes clearly enough," she said softly. "I saw fear and ignorance turn good neighbors into a mob. But I also saw how one person's courage, yours, made them remember their humanity." "That was different," Matteo growled, turning to stoke the dying embers in the hearth. "I had a rifle. And I have the truth." Luna moved to the rough-hewn table where their breakfast of cornbread and coffee waited. "Which do you think my husband would have me rely on?" Matteo's shoulders stiffened at the mention of Captain Wilkins. He remained silent as Luna blessed their simple meal, but left his cornbread untouched. "Your husband isn't here," he finally said, his voice low. "He can't protect you now." Luna broke her cornbread into small pieces, considering her words carefully. "James taught me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right despite our fear." She looked up at Matteo. "Hiding in these mountains while evil men steal what he meant for good. That would shame his memory far more than any harm they might do to me." The cabin fell silent except for the morning wind whistling through the cedar-shake roof. Matteo paced the length of the small room, his boots striking the plank floor with barely contained frustration. Luna continued her breakfast, waiting. Finally, Matteo stopped at the window, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the brightening sky. "You're determined to do this?" "I am." He turned, his expression a mix of resignation and resolve. "If you go, I go with you." Luna's eyes widened slightly. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Matteo grabbed his coat from its peg. "Give me 10 minutes to saddle the mule." True to his word, Matteo had his sure-footed mule ready quickly. He secured Luna's satchel behind the saddle and helped her mount, his hands gentle despite his gruff manner. The morning air bit sharp and clean as they began their descent from the cabin. The trail wound treacherously down the mountainside, slick with melting snow. Matteo led the mule on foot, choosing each step with care. The animal's hooves broke through occasional ice crusts, but its steady gait never faltered. Luna held the saddle horn, trying not to think about the steep drop to their right. As the sun climbed higher, the snow grew heavier and wetter. Matteo's boots and the hem of Luna's dress were soon soaked. They stopped briefly to rest in a stand of bare aspens, sharing dried beef and hard biscuits from Matteo's provisions. By midday, they reached a frozen creek where the trail leveled briefly. Luna asked to stop, her legs stiff from riding. Matteo helped her down, then busied himself checking the mule's tack while she walked to stretch her muscles. The creek ice had begun to crack in places, revealing dark water moving beneath. Luna knelt beside it, unmindful of the snow soaking her skirts. Clasping her hands, she began to pray aloud. Lord, guide our steps and guard our hearts. Let truth be our shield and justice our aim. Grant us wisdom to know your will and courage to follow it. She paused, then added softly, And Lord, please help those who acted against me to see your light and turn from darkness. Mateo had stopped his work with the mule, standing silent behind her. When Luna finished, she remained kneeling, watching the water move beneath the ice. James used to say that prayer is like this creek, she said. Even when everything seems frozen and still on the surface, grace keeps flowing underneath. Your husband said a lot of things, Mateo observed, but his tone held no mockery. Luna rose, brushing snow from her skirts. He did, and he lived by them too. She turned to face Mateo. Thank you for coming with me. I know how much you dislike leaving your mountain. Mateo adjusted his rifle strap, avoiding her eyes. Man's got to decide what he stands for. Can't always choose where that leads him. They continued down the trail as afternoon shadows lengthened across the snow. The air grew colder as the sun sank behind the peaks. When they reached the timberline, where stunted pines gave way to taller forest, Mateo called a halt. We'll camp here tonight, he said, leading the mule into a small clearing sheltered by thick evergreens. Too dangerous to keep going in the dark, and we're still half a day's ride from town. Luna didn't argue. Her muscles ached from the long ride, and the emotional weight of their journey pressed heavily on her spirit. She helped Mateo gather dry wood for a fire, while he laid out bedrolls and tended to the mule. The small fire cast dancing shadows on the snow-laden branches above them. Luna prepared a simple supper from their provisions, and they ate in comfortable silence. Above the trees, stars began to appear in the deepening blue of dusk, sharp and bright as shards of glass in the mountain air. When Luna finished her meal, she folded her hands and bowed her head. Thank you, Lord, for safe travels today, for this fire's warmth, and for good companions on difficult paths. Guide us through whatever tomorrow brings. Amen. For the first time since she'd known him, Mateo's quiet Amen joined hers. Luna looked up, surprised, but Mateo had already turned away to add wood to the fire. The flames caught and crackled, sending sparks rising toward the star-filled sky. Neither spoke of his prayer, but something had shifted between them, as subtle and significant as the first stirrings of spring beneath winter's snow. They settled into their bedrolls, Mateo positioning himself between Luna and the trail. The fire burned low, and Luna watched the stars through gaps in the evergreen branches until sleep began to blur her vision. Her last conscious thought was of James, and how he would approve of this strange partnership. A widow and a mountain man, carrying his dreams of justice down from the high country toward whatever waited in Silver Pass. Dawn painted the eastern sky in pale gold as Luna and Mateo descended the final slope toward Silver Pass. The mining town sprawled below them, smoke rising from scattered chimneys in the crisp morning air. Luna's hands tightened on the reins, but she kept her back straight, refusing to show the fear that fluttered in her chest. Mateo walked beside the mule, his rifle cradled in his arms. His eyes constantly scanned the trail ahead, alert for any threat. They had barely spoken since breaking camp, each lost in their own thoughts about what awaited them. As they approached the town limits, Luna could see miners gathered outside the Frontier Saloon, their faces turning one by one to watch their approach. The sound of the mule's hooves on the packed earth seemed unnaturally loud in the morning quiet. A few men spat in the dirt. Others ducked inside, no doubt spreading word of their arrival. "Still time to turn back," Matteo muttered, but Luna shook her head. "The church," she said softly. "That's where we need to go first." They made their way down the main street, past the general store where Luna had once traded herbs and medicines for supplies. The shopkeeper's wife peeked through the window, then quickly drew the curtain. Near the blacksmith's shop, two women hurried their children inside, shooting fearful glances over their shoulders. Luna's bruises still marked her face, faded to yellowish green, but visible enough to draw stares. She lifted her chin higher, focusing on the white-painted church at the end of the street. Its simple cross stood stark against the mountain backdrop, offering a promise of sanctuary she prayed would prove true. Reverend Elias Carver stood on the church porch, nervously adjusting his collar as they approached. His thin face showed the conflict between Christian duty and fear of the town's powerful men. Still, he managed a slight bow as Luna drew the mule to a halt. "Mrs. Wilkins," he said, his voice barely carrying across the morning air. I heard you might be returning." "Reverend Carver." Luna's voice was steady, though her heart pounded. "I've come to seek the protection of the church while I await the circuit judge's arrival." The preacher glanced, anxiously up and down the street, where more townspeople had gathered to watch. "I'm not sure that would be wise, considering the recent unpleasantness." "It would be less wise to deny shelter to one in need," Luna replied quietly. "Wouldn't you agree, Reverend?" Matteo shifted his weight, positioning himself between Luna and the growing crowd. His presence seemed to decide the matter for Reverend Carver, who quickly nodded. "Of course, you're right. Please, come inside, both of you." He gestured toward the church door, then added in a lower voice, "Though the parsonage might be more suitable." Before Luna could respond, a sharp voice cut through the morning air. Well, look who's bringing trouble to our town again." Silas Ketteridge strode up the street, his expensive boots clicking against the wooden sidewalk. The mine foreman's silver-streaked hair was neatly combed, his vest embroidered with silver thread that caught the morning light. But his eyes were cold as he stopped at the bottom of the church steps, flanked by two burly miners. "Mrs. Wilkins," he said, his tone dripping with false courtesy. "I thought we'd made it clear you weren't welcome here anymore." Luna met his gaze calmly. "I've come to present evidence to Judge Pennington regarding water rights in this valley, Mr. Ketteridge. Evidence that proves my late husband's legal claim to the spring that feeds your mine." A muscle twitched in Ketteridge's jaw. "Is that so?" He looked past her to Reverend Carver. "And you're harboring this troublemaker?" The preacher's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "The church is open to all who seek its shelter, Mr. Ketteridge. It's not my place to— It's your place to maintain order in this community," Ketteridge snapped. "Or have you forgotten who paid for that new bell in your tower?" Matteo's hand drifted toward his holster, but Luna reached down to touch his arm. The gesture was gentle but firm, a reminder that violence would only prove their enemies right. Matteo's hand dropped back to his side, though his eyes never left Ketteridge's face. "The judge arrives tomorrow," Luna said, her voice carrying clearly in the tense silence. "I ask only for shelter until then, when the law can speak for itself." More townspeople had gathered now, forming a loose circle around the church steps. Luna recognized faces among them, women whose babies she had delivered, miners whose wounds she had treated. Some looked away when she met their eyes, but others held her gaze with something like shame or sympathy. Ketteridge seemed to sense the shift in the crowd's mood. His smile grew sharper, more dangerous. "The law, is it?" Well, we'll see what the law has to say about false accusations and stirring up trouble. He turned to address the onlookers. Remember, folks, this woman was run out of town for a reason. Don't let her silver tongue fool you twice. With that, he touched the brim of his hat in mock politeness and turned away. Itzgorf, boots striking the wooden sidewalk like hammer blows as he strode toward the mine office. His two guards lingered a moment longer, their threatening stares making their message clear before they followed their boss. Reverend Carver cleared his throat. Perhaps we should go inside now. My wife can prepare some tea while we discuss arrangements. The parsonage stood behind the church, a modest two-story house with faded white paint and blue shutters. Mrs. Carver, a slight woman with kind eyes, helped Luna settle in the narrow loft while Mateo brought up their few belongings. The space was dusty but clean, with two narrow cots and a small window overlooking the churchyard. It's not much, Mrs. Carver apologized, but it's private and safer than the church proper. It's perfect, Luna assured her. Thank you for your kindness. As evening fell, Luna could hear voices rising from the parlor below, where townspeople came to speak with Reverend Carver. Some spoke in angry whispers, others in pleading tones. Through the rough floorboards, fragments of conversation drifted up to where she sat, mending a tear in her skirt by lamplight. Can't let her cause more trouble. Always treated my Tommy's fever without asking payment. Ketteridge says she's lying about the water rights. Shame what they did to her, a widow and all. Mateo paced near the window, his shadow moving back and forth across the floor like a restless spirit. Every now and then, he would pause to peer out at the darkening street, checking for threats. You should try to rest, Luna told him softly. Tomorrow will be a long day. He grunted in response, but didn't stop his pacing. They're planning something. Ketteridge won't wait for the judge if he can help it. Then we'll face it when it comes, Luna replied, tying off her thread and snipping it with small scissors. God didn't bring us this far to abandon us now. Mateo paused in his pacing to look at her. Your faith always this strong? It has to be. Luna folded her mended skirt and set it aside. Faith isn't just believing when things are easy. It's trusting even when the path ahead looks impossible. From below came the sound of the front door closing, followed by Reverend Carver's footsteps climbing the stairs. He appeared at the loft entrance, his face drawn with worry. I've heard rumors, he said without preamble. Some of the miners are talking about taking matters into their own hands. Before the judge arrives. He twisted his hands together. Perhaps you should leave tonight, while you can. I could have a wagon ready in an hour. Luna stood, her voice firm but gentle. Thank you for your concern, Reverend. But I've run once already. I won't run again. The preacher nodded sadly, as if he'd expected this answer. Then I'll pray for your safety, though I fear prayers may not be enough this time. After he left, silence settled over the loft. The lamp flame flickered, casting long shadows on the sloped ceiling. Outside, a dog barked in the distance, and somewhere in town, a door slammed. Each sound made Mateo tense, his hand straying toward his rifle. Luna unfolded her blanket and spread it over one of the cots. The rough wool was warm despite its age, like the truth she carried. Old but strong enough to endure. She sat on the edge of the cot and began to unpin her hair for the night. You should take the other cot, she told Mateo. You need rest as much as I do. He shook his head. I'll keep watch. All night? All night. Luna didn't argue further. She knew that look in his eyes, the same one he'd worn when he first rescued her from the mob. Instead, she knelt beside her cot and began her evening prayers, her voice barely a whisper in the quiet loft. Through the floorboards, more whispers rose from the town below. Some voices spoke of pity, of shame for what had been done to her. Others muttered darker things, promises of vengeance and threats that made Mateo's jaw clench as he stood guard. But Luna continued her prayers, her faith a quiet flame that no amount of darkness could extinguish. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For now, they waited in the parsonage loft, while Silverpass held its breath below them, and the mountains kept their ancient watch over all. Morning sunlight glinted off patches of dirty snow as Mateo made his way down Silverpass's main street. His boots crunched on the frozen ground, and his breath formed small clouds in the crisp air. He needed supplies, coffee, ammunition, and some basic foodstuffs before the day's events unfolded. The general store's bell chimed as he pushed open the door. Inside, the shopkeeper barely glanced his way, busying himself with arranging cans on a high shelf. Mateo gathered his items quickly, laying them on the counter without a word. As he counted out coins from his leather purse, the bell chimed again. Silas Ketteridge's reflection appeared in the storefront window, flanked by two of his mine guards. The foreman's expensive wool coat was dusted with snow, his silver watch chain catching the morning light. "Mr. Brandt," Ketteridge said smoothly. "Might I have a word?" Mateo finished counting his coins before turning. "Said all I need to say." "Now don't be hasty." Ketteridge dismissed his guards with a wave, sending them outside to wait. "I'm a businessman, sir. I believe in solving problems through negotiation." The shopkeeper suddenly remembered urgent business in his back room, leaving them alone among the barrels and dry goods. Ketteridge reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. The distinct weight of it spoke clearly. Gold. $200, Ketteridge said, placing the pouch on the counter. "Take the woman and leave Silverpass. Today. Forget this unpleasantness about water rights, and everyone profits." Mateo stared at the pouch for a long moment. Then he turned and spat deliberately on the snow-dampened floorboards. "Keep your blood money," he said, gathering his supplies into a burlap sack. "And stay clear of the Widow Wilkins." Ketteridge's pleasant mask slipped, revealing something cold and dangerous beneath. "You're making a grave mistake, Mr. Brandt. That woman is nothing but trouble. Trouble that could get a man killed in these parts." "That a threat?" "Simply an observation." Ketteridge's smile returned, sharp as a knife. "Mountains can be dangerous. Accidents happen every day." Mateo stepped close, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "They sure do. Remember that." He shouldered past the mine boss and out into the morning air. The guards straightened as he passed, hands hovering near their holsters. But Mateo didn't spare them a glance. His mind was already racing ahead to what needed to be done. Ketteridge wasn't the type to let rejection go unanswered. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Luna spent hours at the parsonage desk, carefully writing out her statement for Judge Pennington. Her penmanship was neat and deliberate, each word chosen with care to present the truth clearly. Mateo kept watch from the window, noting every stranger who passed the church. As evening approached, Reverend Carver brought them a simple supper of bread and stew. His wife, Noki, followed with a pot of fresh coffee. She moved quietly, her dark eyes taking in everything but saying little. There was something calming about her presence that seemed to ease the tension in the room. "The judge should arrive by noon tomorrow," Reverend Carver said, wringing his hands. "If you can just hold out until then." Luna looked up from her writing. "We'll manage, Reverend. Thank you for your hospitality." Noki placed a cup of coffee near Luna's hand. "The spirits are restless tonight," she said softly. "Best stay alert." Mateo noticed how the preacher's wife touched the silver cross at her neck, even as she spoke of spirits. She seemed to walk in two worlds with grace, neither fully abandoning her Cherokee heritage nor rejecting her Christian faith. She caught his questioning look and offered a small smile. "Truth is truth," she said simply, "no matter which path leads you there." The sound of breaking glass shattered the peaceful moment. Mateo was moving before the echo died, tackling Luna away from the desk as a bullet splintered the wood where she'd been sitting. Noki dropped to the floor while Reverend Carver shouted in alarm. "Stay down," Mateo ordered, drawing his revolver. Through the broken window, he caught glimpses of movement in the gathering dark, 3 or 4 figures running between buildings. "Watch her," he told the preacher, then vaulted through the window frame, glass crunching under his boots as he landed. The cold air hit him like a slap as he sprinted after the shooters, following their tracks in the patches of remaining snow. The chase led him past the livery stable and toward the edge of town. Fresh hoof prints showed where horses had been waiting, but something else caught his eye. A wooden stake driven into the frozen ground. It had been set alight and left to burn, the flames casting weird shadows on its crude carving, a death's head grinning in the firelight. Ketteridge's warning sign, used to mark claims he meant to take by force. Mateo yanked the stake free and extinguished the flames in the snow. By the time he returned to the parsonage, he found Luna being tended to by Noki. Though visibly shaken, Luna's eyes were clear and determined. "Are you hurt?" he asked, scanning her for injuries. "Just scratches from the glass," she replied. She touched her temple where a small cut bled. "Nothing serious?" Noki was already cleaning the wound with gentle hands. "Here," she said to Mateo, noticing blood on his sleeve. "You're hurt too." He glanced down to find his arm had been grazed, probably by flying glass or splinters. He hadn't even felt it in the rush of the moment. "It's nothing," he started to say, but Noki was already leading him to a chair, her quiet authority brooking no argument. "Sit," she commanded, gathering her healing supplies. "All wounds need tending, big or small." As she cleaned and bandaged his arm, Reverend Carver paced nervously. "This is madness. They could have killed you both. We should send for the sheriff." "The sheriff's in Ketteridge's pocket," Mateo said grimly. "We need to move somewhere more defensible until the judge arrives." "The church," Noki suggested, tying off his bandage. "Thick walls, few windows, easy to defend." Luna gathered her papers with trembling hands. "What about you and the Reverend? We can't put you in danger." "We're already in danger by choosing right over wrong," Noki replied calmly. "The church is safer for all of us tonight." They gathered what they needed quickly. Luna's documents, some blankets, Mateo's rifle and spare ammunition. The short walk to the church seemed to take forever, every shadow potentially hiding another shooter. But they made it without incident, barring the heavy doors behind them. The church interior was dark and cool, smelling of pine wood and lamp oil. Noki lit a few candles near the altar, while Reverend Carver helped arrange bedding in the first few pews. Mateo checked every window and door, planning sight lines and defensive positions. Luna sat in a pew, still clutching her papers. In the candlelight, her face showed both fear and resolution. "They really mean to kill us, don't they?" Mateo paused in his preparations. "They mean to scare us away. Killing's their last resort, brings too much attention." "But they'll do it if they have to." "Yes." He saw no point in lying to her. "But they'll have to get through me first." "And us," Noki added, bringing Luna a cup of water. She sat beside the widow, taking her hand. "You're not alone in this fight, sister." Reverend Carver cleared his throat. I should have spoken up sooner, when they first started spreading lies about you. A pastor should defend the innocent." "You're speaking up now," Luna said kindly. That's what matters. Outside, a dog barked in the distance. Matteo moved to check the window again, his hand never far from his weapon. The street remained empty, but he knew Ketteridge's men were out there, watching, waiting for another chance. Noki began humming softly, a Cherokee melody that seemed to fill the church with peace despite their circumstances. Luna closed her eyes, some of the tension leaving her shoulders as she listened. Even Matteo felt the calming effect of the gentle tune. My grandmother sang this to chase away evil spirits, Noki explained between verses, to remind us that darkness always passes and morning always comes. They settled in for a long night, taking turns keeping watch. The candles burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Through the stained glass windows, moonlight painted colored patterns on the wooden floor. Every creak and whisper of wind brought them alert, but no further attacks came. Luna finally dozed in a pew, her precious documents clutched to her chest. Matteo watched her sleep, marveling at her courage. She could have taken Ketteridge's earlier offers to leave, could have abandoned her claim to the water rights. Instead, she chose to stand for truth, no matter the cost. Noki appeared at his side, offering him coffee. You care for her, she observed quietly. Matteo accepted the cup without reply, but his eyes never left Luna's sleeping form. Tomorrow would bring either justice or more violence, and he intended to be ready for either. Inside the church, lamplight cast a warm glow across worn wooden pews. Luna sat beside Noki at a small table near the altar, their hands moving steadily as they washed and rolled clean bandages. The familiar work brought Luna comfort, reminding her of countless hours spent tending soldiers during the war. The miners' camp has been hit hard by fever, Noki explained, wringing water from a fresh strip of cloth. Many are too proud to ask for help, but their families suffer. Luna nodded, remembering faces she'd glimpsed through cabin windows during her brief time in Silver Pass. Pride shouldn't keep children from getting care, she said softly. The church door creaked open, letting in a gust of cold air. 3 women entered hesitantly, led by Sarah Miller, the baker's wife. Their eyes darted nervously between Luna and the floor. We brought more cloth for bandages, Sarah said, setting down a bundle. She twisted her apron in her hands. And I wanted to say, I'm sorry for not speaking up when they dragged you through the street. I was afraid, but that's no excuse. Luna's hands stilled over her work. The bruises on her face still ached, but something deeper began to heal as she met Sarah's tearful gaze. There's nothing to forgive, she said gently. Fear makes prisoners of us all sometimes. The other women stepped forward then, adding their own apologies. Mary Beth from the general store admitted she'd known Luna was innocent, but stayed silent. Emma Thompson confessed she'd believed the lies about witchcraft because it was easier than questioning Silas Ketteridge's power over the town. Noki quietly provided chairs, and soon all 6 women were working together, washing and rolling bandages while sharing stories of their own struggles with illness and childbirth. Luna listened, offering medical advice when asked, but mostly just letting them talk. Outside, Matteo kept his vigil on the church steps. Snow had begun falling again, delicate flakes settling on the brim of his hat and the shoulders of his coat. His rifle lay across his knees, ready but not threatening. He watched the street through half-closed eyes, noting every movement in the shadows. The church door opened behind him. Luna emerged carrying 2 tin cups of steaming coffee. She handed one to Matteo and settled beside him on the step, drawing her shawl closer against the cold. The women inside, she said quietly, they're good people who lost their way for a time. Fear can do that to a soul. Matteo sipped his coffee. Fear keeps people alive sometimes. and sometimes it kills what matters most in them. Luna watched the falling snow catch the lamplight. Forgiveness is stronger than fear, you know. It breaks chains fear forges. That's a pretty thought, Matteo said, his voice rough. Can't say I believe it yet. Luna studied his profile, seeing the weight of old battles in the set of his jaw. You will, she said simply. God has patience enough for all our doubts. They sat in companionable silence as the night deepened. More women came to the church, bringing blankets and food for the poor. Each one greeted Luna with shy smiles or murmured apologies. Word spread through the town that the witch was actually helping sick miners' families. Near midnight, Noki brought them fresh coffee and news that several miners' children had broken fevers after using her herbal remedies. The mothers are spreading the word, she said. Hearts are turning. Luna saw the skepticism in Matteo's expression. Small changes matter, she told him. Every act of kindness plants a seed. As dawn approached, the snow stopped. The street filled with people heading to Sunday services, more than the church had seen in weeks. Families who'd avoided each other since the violence began now nodded in greeting. Children who'd been kept inside ventured out to play in the fresh snow. When the church bell rang, Luna was surprised to see miners' families filing in alongside merchants and ranchers. Even a few of Ketteridge's men slipped into back pews, though they kept their eyes down. Reverend Carver stood in his pulpit, hands trembling slightly as he opened his Bible. But when he began to speak, his voice was clear and strong. The prophet Micah tells us what the Lord requires, he said, looking out over his congregation. To do justly, to love, mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. These aren't mere suggestions, friends. They're the very foundation of community. Luna sat between Noki and Matteo, aware of eyes turning her way as the Reverend continued. We've failed in justice, he said plainly. We've forgotten mercy. Pride and fear have led us far from humble paths. But God's grace gives us chance after chance to begin again. Sarah Miller was quietly weeping in her pew. Others dabbed at their eyes or stared at their hands. The Reverend's words laid bare the shame many had carried since the mob violence. This morning, Carver went on, I saw true Christianity at work. Not in loud proclamations or shows of power, but in gentle hands washing bandages, in women asking forgiveness and receiving it with grace, in mercy freely given where none was deserved. He closed his Bible and gripped the pulpit. Silver Pass can be better than fear, and greed have made us. We can choose justice over expedience, mercy over vengeance, humility over pride. The choice begins today, with each of us. When he called for prayers, every head bowed. Luna heard soft sobs and murmured amens throughout the church. Noki's clear voice led them in a hymn, first in Cherokee, then English. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. After the service, people lingered to help distribute blankets and food to needy families. Children played tag between the pews while their parents talked in low voices, making plans to help sick neighbors. The atmosphere had shifted from tension to tentative hope. Matteo watched it all from his post by the door, his expression thoughtful. When Luna joined him, he said, I've seen towns tear themselves apart over less than water rights. Never seen one start healing like this. Love is stronger than hate, Luna replied. We just forget sometimes, until someone reminds us. And that someone has to be willing to get hurt doing the reminding, he said, glancing at her fading bruises. Luna touched his arm gently. Some things are worth the risk, she said, like showing people they're better than their worst choices. Through the open church door, they could see Silver Pass stretching out below them, smoke rising from chimneys into the clear morning air. Children's laughter echoed off the buildings. and somewhere a woman was singing as she hung washing. "It's not fixed yet," Matteo warned. "Ketteridge won't give up his plans because of one Sunday service." "No," Luna agreed, "but we're not alone anymore, and that changes everything." Inside the church, Noki organized women into groups to visit the sick, while Reverend Carver spoke earnestly with miners about justice and restitution. Small steps toward healing, but significant ones. Luna watched it all with quiet joy, remembering her late husband's belief that good people would choose right if given the chance. She said a silent prayer of thanks for his wisdom, and for the strange path that had led her here, too. This moment when fear began giving way to faith, and mercy started its slow work of transformation. Evening shadows stretched across the wooden floorboards as Luna swept the church aisles, humming, "What a friend we have in Jesus," under her breath. The day's earlier hope lingered like sunlight through stained glass. She paused to straighten a hymnal, remembering how full the pews had been that morning. Through the open windows came the sound of Tommy, Noki's 10-year-old son, talking softly to the church mule in the barn. The boy had a gentle way with animals, just like his mother. Luna smiled, hearing him explain to the mule why hay was better than grass. Matteo stood guard by the door, as he had all day. His shoulders were tense, eyes constantly scanning the street. The peace felt too fragile to trust. Luna understood his wariness, but refused to let fear rule her heart again. "You should rest," she told him, leaning the broom against a pew. "You've been standing watch since dawn." He shook his head. "Something ain't right. Town's too quiet." Before Luna could respond, Matteo's head snapped up. His nostrils flared as he inhaled sharply. "Smoke," he said, voice hard with alarm. "Not chimney smoke." A orange glow suddenly lit the windows. Outside, flames roared up the side of the barn where Tommy had been feeding the mule. The dry wood caught like tinder, fire racing toward the hayloft. "Tommy!" Luna cried, running for the door. Matteo was already moving, long strides eating up the distance to the barn. The heat hit them like a wall as they approached. Inside, they heard coughing and the panicked wheeze of the mule. Smoke poured through gaps in the wooden walls. Matteo slammed his shoulder against the door, once, twice, until the lock splintered and it burst open. "Tommy!" Luna called again, squinting through the thick smoke. "Where are you, child?" A weak cough answered from the corner. Luna dropped to her hands and knees, crawling toward the sound, while Matteo fought to control the terrified mule. She found Tommy huddled against the wall, his face streaked with soot. "Come on, sweetheart," she said, pulling him close. "We need to get out now." The boy stumbled as she dragged him toward the door. Above them, the hayloft crackled ominously, sparks raining down. Matteo had managed to get the mule outside, and now he reached back to help Luna and Tommy clear of the barn. They weren't a moment too soon. With a thunderous groan, the roof collapsed inward, sending up a fountain of embers. A burning beam crashed down where they had been standing seconds before. Matteo pushed Luna and Tommy further from the inferno, but as he turned, a sheet of flames caught his coat. He dropped and rolled, smothering the fire, but not before it seared through to his arm and side. The smell of burned wool and flesh filled the air. People were running toward them now, drawn by the commotion. Noki burst through the crowd with a cry, gathering Tommy into her arms. The boy coughed, but managed to smile at his mother. "I got the mule out, Mama," he said proudly. Luna knelt beside Matteo, who was sitting up despite the obvious pain of his burns. His sleeve was charred away, revealing angry red blisters underneath. Similar wounds marked his side where the coat had burned through. "Let me help you," she said, reaching for him, but voices from the crowd made her pause. "Which?" The accusation cut through the crackling of flames. Silas Ketteridge pushed to the front, pointing at Luna with trembling fury. "See what she's brought us? Nothing but bad omens and destruction since she came." Luna felt the crowd's mood shift like wind before a storm. People who had smiled at her that morning now backed away, crossing themselves. Whispers rippled through the gathering. "Curse! Evil eye. Should have run her out." "No," Tommy said suddenly, his voice clear though scratchy from smoke. "I saw them, Mr. Ketteridge's men. They poured something on the hay and used matches." "Hush, boy," Silas snapped. "Smoke's addled your mind. Everyone knows which fire burns green, just like those flames there." He gestured at the barn, where copper-tinged flames did indeed burn with a greenish tint, though Luna recognized it as the result of old copper nails in the wood. More townspeople arrived, drawn by the fire. The whispers grew louder, anger and fear feeding each other. Luna saw hands moving to gun belts, faces hardening with renewed suspicion. "That's enough!" Reverend Carver's voice rang out as he pushed through the crowd. He stood between Luna and the angry faces, arms raised. "This is God's house, and I will not have violence here. Everyone go home, now. I need to tend to the wounded and pray for guidance." Some looked ready to argue, but the Reverend's stern gaze and Noki's quiet dignity as she held her son seemed to shame them. Slowly, reluctantly, people began to disperse into the gathering dark. Silas lingered, his eyes cold. "Prayer won't protect her forever, Reverend. Town's seen her true nature now." He spat in the dirt and stalked away, leaving the threat hanging in the smoke-filled air. "Inside quickly," Reverend Carver said, helping Matteo to his feet. The trapper's face was gray with pain, but he refused to lean on anyone as they made their way into the church. Noki settled Tommy on a pew, checking him over with gentle hands while Luna gathered medical supplies from her bag. The boy's coughing had eased, though his clothes still reeked of smoke. "Hold still," Luna told Matteo as she examined his burns. The wounds were serious but not life-threatening if properly treated. She began cleaning them with water and witch hazel, trying to be gentle despite his occasional sharp intake of breath. "I should have known Silas would try something like this," Matteo said through gritted teeth. "Got too quiet after the service. Should have checked the barn." "You can't blame yourself," Luna replied, carefully wrapping clean bandages around his arm. "None of us expected them to target a child." "Which makes their sin all the greater," Reverend Carver said grimly. He had been praying silently by the altar but now turned to face them. "We cannot let fear rule us again, not after how far we've come." Noki looked up from where she sat, stroking Tommy's hair. "But what can we do? Their hearts were opening this morning. Now—" She trailed off, pain clear in her voice. Luna finished bandaging Matteo's wounds and sat back, suddenly weary. The smell of smoke still hung heavy in the air, a reminder of how quickly hope could turn to ashes. But as she looked at those gathered in the lamplight, the brave Reverend, steady Noki, innocent Tommy, and Matteo with his stubborn strength, she felt her resolve strengthen. "We continue in faith," she said quietly. "We show them that love and truth burn brighter than any fire of hatred. What else can we do?" Matteo's hand found hers in the shadows, rough and warm despite his injuries. He didn't speak, but his grip said what words couldn't, that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Outside, the barn continued to smolder in the gathering dark, while inside the church, 5 people prayed for strength to face the days ahead. The peace of morning lay in ruins, but perhaps, Luna thought, that only meant they needed to build something stronger in its place. Gray shadows crept across the church floor as night gave way to the first hint of dawn. Luna dozed in a wooden chair beside Matteo's cot, her hand resting near his fevered brow. His burns had worsened through the night, angry red welts that radiated heat despite the cool cloths she pressed against them. Every few hours, he would wake thrashing, muttering about fire and battles long past, until her gentle voice soothed him back to restless sleep. In the corner, Tommy slept curled against his mother's side, while Noki hummed soft Cherokee lullabies. Reverend Carver had finally surrendered to exhaustion in his study, his Bible open on the desk before him. The single oil lamp cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the small parsonage feel both sanctuary and prison. The sudden thunder of boots on the porch shattered the pre-dawn quiet. The door burst open with a crack that made Luna jump to her feet. Sheriff Lyle stood in the doorway, his badge catching the lamplight as two deputies crowded behind him. Their hands rested on their gun belts. "Luna Wilkins," the sheriff growled, "you're under arrest for witchcraft and attempted murder." Noki rose swiftly, placing herself between Luna and the lawman. "This is madness, Sheriff. She saved my boy from the fire. She's been healing the sick. Step aside, Mrs. Carver." Sheriff Lyle's voice held cold warning. "Don't make me arrest you too for harboring a witch." "I'm no witch," Luna said quietly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm a midwife and a Christian woman. You know this, Sheriff." "What I know is you brought nothing but trouble since you came." He jerked his chin toward his deputies. "Take her." The men moved forward, rough hands grabbing Luna's arms. On the cot, Mateo stirred at the commotion. His eyes opened, glazed with fever, but quickly focusing on the scene before him. "No," he rasped, trying to push himself up. His burned arm trembled with the effort. "Leave her be." "Stay down, Brant," the sheriff ordered. "This ain't your concern." Mateo managed to get one foot on the floor before his strength failed. He collapsed back onto the cot, face gray with pain and frustration. "Luna," he called weakly as the deputies began dragging her towards the door. "It's all right, Mateo," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Save your strength. Trust in God's plan." Sheriff Lyle produced a length of rope and began binding Luna's wrists. "God's plan is justice for them that deserve it. That fire nearly killed a child. Town's had enough of your devil's work." "Sheriff, please," Noki pleaded. "At least wait for the circuit judge. He's due today." "Judge might not even make it through in this weather." The sheriff nodded towards the window where fresh snowflakes had begun falling in the pre-dawn gloom. "And we ain't waiting. Too many strange happenings since she came. Time to end it." Reverend Carver appeared in his study doorway, face lined with worry. "This is wrong, Sheriff. You know it in your heart. What I know is my duty to protect this town." Sheriff Lyle finished the knots with a sharp tug. "Now stand aside, Reverend, lest you want trouble with your congregation." The deputies pulled Luna through the door into the bitter morning air. A prison wagon waited outside, its iron bars stark against the falling snow. They lifted her roughly onto the wooden floor, slamming the gate behind her. From inside the parsonage came the sound of something falling, followed by Mateo's voice raised in anger and pain. Luna pressed her face against the cold bars, straining to see, but the deputies blocked her view as they mounted up to flank the wagon. Sheriff Lyle swung into his saddle, scowling at the gathered faces in the doorway. "Anyone tries to interfere, they'll join her in a cell. That's my warning to you all." The wagon lurched forward, iron wheels crunching through fresh snow. Luna caught a final glimpse of the parsonage, Noki holding back tears, Reverend Carver's bowed head, and Mateo's pale face appearing briefly at the window before the wagon turned onto the main street. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the snow-laden clouds in shades of iron and pearl. Luna huddled in her thin shawl, shivering as the wind cut through the bars. Her bound hands ached in the cold, but the pain in her heart was sharper. After everything, after showing nothing but kindness, the town still chose fear over truth. They passed the ruins of the church barn, black timbers still smoking faintly in the snow. Luna closed her eyes and prayed, not for herself, but for those who had been poisoned by hatred and suspicion. She prayed for Mateo's healing, for Tommy's innocent heart to stay pure, for Noki and the Reverend's courage to stand firm. Behind her in the parsonage, Mateo fought against the weakness in his limbs. "Help me up," he demanded, voice rough with pain and urgency. "Can't let them do this." "You'll tear your wounds open," Noki warned, but she still moved to support him as he struggled to sit. "Rather tear myself apart than let them hang her." Mateo's good hand clenched into a fist. "She's innocent. You all know it." Reverend Carver paced the small room, worry etched deep in his features. "Violence won't save her, Mateo, but perhaps—" He stopped suddenly, turning to his wife. "Noki, where's that young Cherokee rider who brought news from the mission yesterday? The one who knows these mountain trails?" "Joseph Two-Trees," she said, understanding lighting her eyes. "He stayed with his cousin near the creek." "Get him," the Reverend said. "Tell him I need him to ride fast, faster than he's ever ridden. The circuit judge's camp should be less than 20 miles out, near Morrison's Creek. He must warn them what's happening here." Noki nodded and hurried out into the snowy dawn. The Reverend turned back to Mateo, who had managed to get both feet on the floor despite the pain twisting his features. "Give me my gun," Mateo growled. "No." Reverend Carver's voice was firm. "I know you'd die trying to save her, but that would only seal her fate. We must trust in the law now. Real law, not this mockery. Judge Pennington is a fair man, known for his wisdom. If we can get word to him in time, and if we can't—" Mateo's fever-bright eyes held desperate fury. "I won't let them murder her while we wait for justice to ride in on a white horse." "Then we'll find another way," the Reverend promised. "One that doesn't end with more blood on the snow." Tommy, who had been silent since the sheriff's intrusion, suddenly spoke up. "I could tell the judge what I saw, about Mr. Ketteridge's men starting the fire." "Hush, little one," his mother said, returning from her errand. "Joseph rides out now, fast as wind. We must pray and keep faith." She turned to the others. "He knows the trails better than any marshal. If anyone can reach the judge in time, it's him." Outside, the sound of hoofbeats faded into the falling snow as Joseph Two-Trees raced against time. In his wake, 4 people gathered around Mateo's sickbed to pray. The Reverend with his Bible open to psalms of deliverance, Noki holding her son close, and Mateo with his face set in grim determination despite the fever racking his body. The snow continued to fall, covering the town in a blanket of false peace, while Luna sat alone in the cold wagon, her soft prayers rising like smoke into the pewter sky. Morning crept forward with agonizing slowness, each moment precious, each second carrying them closer to either salvation or tragedy. In the jail wagon, Luna watched her breath form clouds in the frigid air. The rough planks beneath her offered no comfort, and her bound hands had gone numb with cold. Still, she held on to hope, not for herself, but for the wounded souls of Silver Pass. If her trial could bring truth to light, perhaps some good would come from this suffering. Sheriff Lyle rode ahead, his broad back rigid with self-righteous certainty. The deputies flanked the wagon, hands never far from their weapons. They passed mine workers heading to their morning shift, who stopped to stare and whisper. Some made signs against evil, others simply looked away, shame or fear in their downturned faces. Luna closed her eyes against their judgment, remembering instead the way Tommy had smiled at her that morning in church, how the miners' wives had brought blankets for the poor, how Mateo's calloused hand had found hers in the darkness. Whatever came next, those moments of grace could not be erased. The wagon rolled on through the falling snow, carrying its burden of injustice toward whatever fate awaited in the cold light of dawn. The jail cell smelled of damp stone and old straw. Luna knelt on the rough planks, her skirts pooled around her like shadows in the faint moonlight that filtered through the barred window. Her lips moved in silent prayer, not for herself, but for those whose hearts had turned to stone. "Father, forgive them," she whispered, her breath visible in the cold air. "Even Silas, who fears losing his power more than he fears you. Even Sheriff Lyle, who mistakes cruelty for justice." Her bound hands remained clasped despite the rope's bite. They know not what they do. Outside the cell, raucous laughter echoed from the deputy's desk. The sharp scent of whiskey drifted through the iron bars. Glass clinked against glass as the men celebrated their catch. "Reckon we saved the town," one deputy slurred. "No more strange deaths, no more fires once she's gone." "Ain't right, though," the younger deputy muttered. "She helped my sister's baby come just last month. Both living healthy now." "Hush that talk," the first deputy warned. "Sheriff says she's guilty, that's all we need to know." Luna closed her eyes, remembering the faces of the women she'd helped, the children she'd delivered safely into the world. How quickly fear could poison memory, turning healing hands into instruments of evil in people's minds. Still, she prayed, her voice barely a whisper in the darkness. "Lord, show them your mercy, as you've shown it to me. Let not hatred rule their hearts forever." Miles away, in the warm lamplight of the parsonage, Noki Carver worked with gentle hands. She spread a poultice of herbs across Mateo's burned shoulder and side, her movements careful but sure. The sharp, clean scent of yarrow and comfrey filled the small room. "You must rest," she urged, seeing him struggle to sit upright. "The burns are deep. Moving will only—" "Can't rest," Mateo growled through clenched teeth. "Not while they're planning to hang an innocent woman." His good hand gripped the bed frame, knuckles white with strain. Noki pressed him back against the pillows with firm kindness. "At least let me finish binding the wounds. You'll do her no good if you bleed to death on the trail." Outside, the wind moaned through bare branches, carrying fresh snow against the windows. Mateo submitted to Noki's ministrations, though every muscle in his body tensed with urgency. She worked swiftly, wrapping clean bandages around his torso and shoulder. "The fever still burns in you," she said softly. "This is foolishness." "Maybe so." Mateo's voice was rough with pain. "But I've been a fool before and lived." His eyes focused on something distant, remembering battlefields where other good people had died while he survived. "Won't let her face this alone." When Noki finished, Mateo forced himself to stand. The room swayed around him, but he steadied himself against the wall. Step by careful step, he made his way to the trunk where he'd stored the documents that had started all this trouble. The oilskin packet crackled as he withdrew it, the papers inside still bearing Captain Wilkins' neat signature. These deeds had cost a good man his life, and now threatened to cost Luna hers. Mateo tucked them carefully inside his shirt, close to his heart. "Your husband's horse," he said to Noki. "I need to borrow him. My mule's too slow for this." Noki hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Thunder knows the trail well, even in darkness." She moved to help him with his gun belt, seeing how his burned arm trembled. "He's strong and sure-footed, but you're in no condition to ride." "No choice." Mateo checked his revolver with his good hand, making sure each chamber was loaded. "Time's running out." They made their way slowly to the stable behind the parsonage, where Thunder nickered softly in greeting. The big bay gelding stood quietly as Noki saddled him, adjusting the stirrups to Mateo's height. Fresh snow had drifted through cracks in the barn walls, gathering in small white dunes against the stalls. Mateo gritted his teeth against the pain as Noki helped him mount. Every movement sent fire through his burned side, but he forced himself to sit straight in the saddle. Thunder shifted beneath him, sensing his rider's distress. "The Lord goes before you," Noki said softly, pressing something into his good hand, a small leather pouch of herbs. "For the pain, mix with water when you can." Mateo tucked the pouch away, nodding his thanks. Words seemed inadequate for the risk she and her husband had taken in helping them. "Keep watch for the judge," he managed. "If he comes, we'll send him straight to town," she promised. "Now ride. And Mateo," she touched his knee gently, "remember that vengeance belongs to God alone." He gathered the reins, feeling Thunder's strength beneath him. "Not seeking vengeance," he said quietly. "Just justice." The horses' hooves crunched through fresh snow as they moved away from the parsonage. Dawn was just beginning to stain the eastern sky, turning the clouds from black to deep purple. The wind had died down, leaving the world eerily silent except for Thunder's breathing and the creak of saddle leather. Pain throbbed with every stride, but Mateo forced himself to focus on the trail ahead. The fever made the shadows dance at the edges of his vision, trees seeming to move in ways they shouldn't. He pressed his burned side against the saddle horn, using the sharp bite of pain to keep himself alert. The miles stretched endless before him, each one purchased with agony and determination. Thunder proved as sure-footed as Noki had promised, picking his way carefully down the snow-covered trail. The big horse seemed to understand the urgency of their mission, never faltering even when the path grew treacherous. Back in her cell, Luna had risen from her prayers to pace the small space. Her legs had grown stiff from kneeling, and movement helped ward off the bitter cold. The deputies had finally fallen silent, either asleep or passed out from their celebration. She thought of Mateo, hoping he was resting, healing from the burns he'd suffered trying to save Noki's son. The memory of his face in the parsonage window, twisted with helpless fury as they'd taken her away, haunted her. She prayed he wouldn't do anything rash, wouldn't risk his life trying to save hers. "Lord, keep him safe," she whispered, touching the rough stone wall. "Let him find peace, whatever comes." The night crept forward with agonizing slowness. Luna counted her steps, 7 from wall to wall, 5 from bars to back. She recited psalms under her breath, letting David's ancient words of hope strengthen her spirit. When fear threatened to overwhelm her, she remembered her husband's favorite saying, "Perfect love casts out fear." On the trail, Mateo swayed in the saddle as Thunder picked his way around a fallen log. The fever made everything blur at the edges, but he forced himself to stay upright. The deed papers crackled against his chest with every movement, a reminder of what was at stake. He thought of Luna's gentle hands tending his cabin, her quiet strength in facing the mob, the way she'd touched his arm to stop him from violence. So much grace in such a small frame. The world needed more light like hers, not less. Dawn painted the sky in shades of pearl and rose as Thunder carried his wounded rider toward Silver Pass. Mateo's breath came in ragged gasps, his body burning with fever and pain. But his mind remained fixed on a single purpose, reaching the jail before it was too late. The sound of Luna's prayers echoed softly through the cold stone corridors, a thread of hope in the darkness before dawn. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the cold morning air as townspeople gathered in Silver Pass's main square. The crude gallows loomed dark against the gray sky, hastily constructed from rough-cut timber. Sheriff Lyle stood at its base, a satisfied smirk beneath his mustache as his deputies led Luna forward. Luna's face was pale but composed, her steps steady despite the bindings at her wrists. Her lips moved in silent prayer, eyes lifted toward heaven. The crowd pressed closer, their jeers muffled by the falling snow. Some turned away, unable to watch, while others called out cruel words that dissolved into the winter air. The rope creaked as the sheriff adjusted the noose, its hemp fibers stiff with frost. He reached for Luna's shoulders, about to guide her onto the platform, when a shout pierced the heavy silence. "Stop!" The voice rang out, hoarse but commanding. All heads turned toward the ridge. There sat Matteo Brandt, slumped forward on Thunder's back, his face gray with exhaustion and fever. Bandages showed beneath his torn shirt, dark with seeping wounds. In his trembling hand, he held aloft a packet of singed papers. The big bay horse picked his way carefully down the slope as the crowd parted. Matteo's breath came in ragged gasps, each movement clearly causing him agony. When Thunder reached the gallows, Matteo's strength finally failed. He toppled from the saddle, landing hard at Luna's feet. "She owns this land," he rasped, pushing the half-burned deed toward the sheriff. "Captain Wilkins left her. Everything. The spring, the water rights, all legal, all witnessed." A stunned silence fell over the square. Sheriff Lyle snatched the papers, his face darkening as he read. The townspeople pressed closer, murmuring in confusion and growing shock. Before anyone could move, the thunder of approaching hooves split the air. A group of riders appeared through the curtain of snow, led by a distinguished man in a black coat. The circuit judge had arrived, his expression stern as he took in the scene before him. Behind him rode Reverend Carver's messenger, looking exhausted but triumphant. They had made it in time, just as Noki had prayed they would. Luna stood very still, the noose still hanging empty beside her, as tears of relief tracked silently down her cheeks. Her whispered, "Thank you, Lord," was nearly lost in the growing commotion, but Matteo heard it from where he lay in the snow at her feet. Judge Harold Pennington's commanding voice cut through the tense morning air. "Everyone inside. Now!" He gestured towards the courthouse, his black coat dusted with melting snow. Two deputies helped Matteo to his feet while Luna hurried to support him. The courtroom filled quickly, smelling of wet wool and wood smoke. Townsfolk pressed shoulder to shoulder in the narrow benches, their faces drawn with uncertainty. The judge settled behind the weather-worn desk, carefully spreading out the scorched papers Matteo had brought. Noki stood beside her husband, her dark eyes steady as she raised her right hand. "I swear before God and these witnesses," she said clearly, "that I saw Silas Ketteridge's men set fire to our church barn, endangering my son and trying to destroy these documents." Silas pushed forward, his face red with anger. "This is nonsense. You can't trust a—" "Silence!" The judge's palm struck the desk. He lifted the Army survey, its official seals still visible despite the smoke damage. His voice carried to every corner as he read, "By order of the United States Army Corps of Engineers, the natural spring and water rights of Silver Pass Creek are hereby granted to Captain James Wilkins and his heirs in perpetuity, in recognition of his service." He looked up, fixing Silas with a steely gaze. "These rights now belong to his widow, Luna Wilkins." The courtroom fell so quiet they could hear the drip of melting snow outside. Luna stood straight, tears gleaming in her eyes, but her head held high. "Let me be clear," Judge Pennington continued. "These rights are legal and permanent. Any further mob action or attempts at intimidation will bring the full force of United States Marshals down on this town." He set the papers down with finality. "This matter is settled." Silas's face twisted with rage. He spun on his heel and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. The sound seemed to break a spell, and the townspeople began to stir, many hanging their heads in shame. Luna knelt beside Matteo, who had slumped unconscious in his chair. "Thank you," she whispered, touching his fevered brow as tears fell freely. "Thank you for believing in justice." Through the courthouse windows, they could see the snow had stopped. The late morning sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the empty gallows, where mercy had finally triumphed over hatred. Throughout the room, one by one, the townsfolk bowed their heads, the weight of their guilt visible in every slumped shoulder and down-turned face. 3 days after the courthouse drama, morning sunlight streamed through the parsonage windows. Luna dabbed Matteo's forehead with a cool cloth, watching his face for any change. The spare room had become a quiet sanctuary of healing, filled with the gentle scent of medicinal herbs and fresh-baked bread. Sarah Miller, the blacksmith's wife who had once turned away from Luna in the street, appeared at the door with a patchwork quilt folded in her arms. "Made this myself," she whispered, eyes downcast. "For him, and to say I'm sorry." Luna accepted it with a gentle smile. "Thank you, Sarah. Your kindness means more than you know." Throughout the morning, other women tiptoed in bearing gifts, Mrs. Peterson with her famous chicken soup, Emma Turner carrying fresh-baked cornbread, and young Betty Wallace holding a jar of preserved peaches. Each came with whispered apologies and down-turned eyes that Luna met with quiet forgiveness. Near midday, Noki arrived with her son, Thomas, their visits having become a daily bright spot. The boy clutched a small wooden horse he'd carved himself. "For Mr. Matteo," Thomas announced proudly, setting it on the bedside table. His cheerful chatter filled the room as he told stories about helping the miners repair the church barn. "They're using real strong beams this time," he explained, "and Papa says the spring water's running clearer than ever." Luna watched Noki's knowing smile, grateful for the friendship that had bloomed between them. The Cherokee woman's steady presence had helped anchor her through these difficult days. As afternoon light softened the room, Matteo's eyes finally fluttered open, clear for the first time since his fever began. He took in the gathered gifts, the fresh quilts, and Luna's tired but happy face. "The town's changed," Luna told him softly, squeezing his hand. "And there's more news. They arrested Silas yesterday. The marshal caught him trying to flee. He'll face charges for the arson." Matteo's voice came rough but steady. "Guess justice came slow but sure." Luna's fingers tightened around his. "No," she said softly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Mercy came first. The justice followed after." She helped him sip some water, and together they listened to the sounds drifting through the window, hammers ringing as men worked on the barn, children's laughter, and the distant rush of the spring flowing free and clear in the afternoon sun. Spring arrived in Silver Pass with gentle persistence. Patches of grass emerged through melting snow as Luna and Matteo walked the thawing valley together. His limp was still visible, a reminder of that desperate morning at the gallows. But healing grew stronger each day. Luna paused near the spring, where fresh water bubbled clear and sweet from the earth. "Here," she said, pointing to a flat stretch of ground. "This is where the mission house should stand. And there, just beyond those aspens, that's perfect for the schoolroom." Matteo nodded, his eyes taking in the abandoned mine road. Weather-worn, closed signs marked where Silas's operation had once scarred the land. Now nature was already beginning to reclaim it with tender shoots of green. Reverend Carver gathered townsfolk near the spring that afternoon. Many of the same faces that had once shown hatred now bowed in humility as he raised his hands in blessing. "May this ground," he prayed, his voice carrying on the breeze, become a place of healing and learning for all God's children. Noki stood nearby, her dark eyes bright with unshed tears, as she watched her friend Luna's dream taking shape. She had already promised to help teach the Cherokee language alongside English letters. Despite protests from those concerned about his injuries, Mateo insisted on helping raise the first support beam. Other men rushed to assist as he struggled with the weight. The heavy timber rose straight and true against the pale spring sky, a testament to new beginnings. That evening they gathered in the parsonage, Luna, Mateo, Noki and her family, and Reverend Carver with his worn Bible. The table was simple but abundant with fresh bread and early spring vegetables. Luna bowed her head and spoke grace softly. "Thank you, Lord, for second chances," she whispered, "for mercy that makes all things new." As lantern light flickered across the walls, Mateo cleared his throat. His voice came rough but honest. "After the war," he said, "I lost my faith, saw too much darkness." He looked at Luna, his eyes softening. "But watching you forgive those who wronged you, it changed something in me, showed me there's still light worth believing in." Luna reached across the table and squeezed his hand, her touch gentle but sure as the spring that flowed outside, bringing new life to the valley. Morning light streamed through the cabin windows, painting golden stripes across the weathered floorboards. Mateo stood by his bed, methodically packing his rifle and saddlebags with practiced hands. His movements were strong and sure now, the burns from that winter night finally healed to pink scars beneath his sleeves. Near the hearth, Luna sat in the old rocker, her Bible open on her lap. The fire crackled softly as she read from Psalms, her voice gentle in the morning quiet. Mateo paused in his packing, watching how the light caught her hair. "What will you do now?" he asked, his voice low and careful. "Now that the land's safe and the mission started?" Luna looked up from her reading, a smile warming her face. "Stay here, of course. These children need teaching, and the mission needs tending." She traced the Bible's worn leather cover. "There's healing to be done still." Mateo nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. He crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hand in his calloused one. "Then you're coming with me," he said softly. The words held no command this time, not like that snowy night he'd rescued her from the mob. Instead, they offered a future. 2 lives joined in purpose. Luna's laugh rang clear as spring water. "Yes," she answered, squeezing his hand. "I reckon I am." Outside the cabin, children's voices carried up from the creek where the water ran sweet and clear. A fresh-painted sign stood proud by the mission path, its white letters declaring, "Silver Pass Mission, all welcome to any traveler passing through." The mission bell rang out across the valley, its clear tone echoing off the mountainsides. Each ring spoke of redemption, of mercy's power to transform hatred into love, fear into faith, and 2 solitary hearts into one shared life of service. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.